Today, I'd like to take a look at some of the different health outcomes as we look at the concept of caste and how that concept has affected our country and how that concept in particular has affected those who are in the minority groups. Interestingly, if you look at our public health system, we see certain biases in that system. For example, in every Medicare category, blacks receive less procedures than whites, even though they have a higher rate of illness, with the exception of shunts for renal disease, leg amputations, testicle removals, and the removal of stomach tissue for ulcers. So you kind of ask yourself, why is it that blacks receive less procedures in Medicare, but yet have a higher rate of illness? There seems to be some disparity there, and you kind of question that and say, what's happening here in terms of our healthcare system? Also, it's interesting to note that blacks receive less pain medication than whites, because doctors feel that they have a higher pain threshold. Kelly M. Hoffman has pointed that out in various studies. There's also a bias in white medical students and interns. So you see this type of thing, and you say, how can we address it in terms of our healthcare system? Tennessee study showed that restrictive health policies cost 4,599 black lives and 12,013 white lives. So these types of outcomes can be reversed if proper medical care is being given. We also look at the concept of affirmative action. And it's interesting when you think of affirmative action, everybody says, oh, it's terrible, it's affirmative action. You're preferring blacks and minorities over whites. And, let's have a level playing field and let's make sure we treat everybody in the same way. Affirmative action, not a good thing. Interesting, though, when you analyze affirmative action a little bit closer, and this was kind of eye-opening to me, and you ask yourself, well, who are the main beneficiaries of affirmative action? And it is white women. The study by Crenshaw, Framing Affirmative Action in the Michigan Law Review, points that out. And thus, if white women are the main beneficiaries, who are really going to be ultimately the main beneficiaries is white families. And so you have a very interesting thing here where you have a lot of white people thinking there's a racial bias here in terms of affirmative action, but ultimately, who does affirmative action benefit more? It benefits more white families. So again, you have to ask yourself, what's happening here in terms of the march towards equality and the idea of treating everybody in the right way and making sure that we don't have any biases and that those who have been really harmed by our system have an ability to really advance and thrive and do better. So again, some of these policies that we have created, we have to take a look at them and say, well, what really has been accomplished, and can things really be better? Can we try better? Can we improve more than we have? Um, and those who control the system and reap the benefits basically remain unchecked, whereas those who are in the lowest castes, both black and the working class whites, they take the blame. So you say to yourself, well, who is benefiting from the system? And you look at it and say, well, there's those in a certain category who are mostly benefiting, and those who are in the minority aspect, and those who are the working class whites are really not gaining that much from the system. So you have to kind of look at it and say, well, can we improve it in any way? Is there any way that we can, do it in a better fashion? One of the interesting things is how bias can creep in to our system, and the story of Charles Stewart is a very interesting story, and I think it makes a good point about that. Um, Charles Stewart killed his wife and he killed his wife in Roxbury. And he decided that what he would do is he would blame this killing on a white man. Uh, he was a white man rather, and he would blame it on a black person. And you might say, why would he blame it on a black person? Well, he blamed it because he thought he would be believed. And as a matter of fact, he was believed initially by the police and by the authorities. Uh, and we're kind of programmed in that way to say, well, it was in Roxbury, and so that's a heavy, minority community, and it was probably a black man who did it. And the police went through all sorts of accusations of different people, and it turned out finally that Stewart had murdered his own wife, and it really came out because Stewart had talked to a friend, and a friend decided to reveal the truth, and so the black man that was charged was let go. Also, a similar pattern we see in March of 2018 in bomb explosions in Austin, Texas. There were two black victims, and then there was a Latina victim, um, and then there was a white victim. And then the suspect was found after the white victim was killed within 24 hours. Initially, the police had blamed the first black victim for his own death. And so again, the bias seemed to come out, kind of clearly here. And you say, well, what's going on here? Why do we tend to think of certain crimes, and associate it more with black people instead of doing the necessary investigation to find out, who actually did the crime? Another aspect of this you see in the Ebola epidemic of 2014. It really showed our interdependence, but why didn't Western nations respond with more medical and scientific help initially to the epidemic? Was it an example of our low regard for people of the lower caste? Do we think, well, it's primarily black people, and so we don't have to expend our resources for that? We see it also with the COVID-19 epidemic. We see really the disparity in terms of our healthcare system. Why were more of the victims minorities? And again, we raise these questions to say, well, what can we improve? Can we do better? Is there something that we're doing wrong in terms of our system? And can we take a look at it and say, well, maybe these are some ways we can improve and do better? When you think of it, sometimes we think of the idea of the alpha male, as the kind of role model. But it's interesting that studies show that the real alpha, the true alpha, is someone who leads with confidence, but not by screaming or yelling. You think of the comparison with dogs and wolves, and they're looking for this alpha person to be the leader. And it's very important that one maybe who is the last to eat, the omega in the wolf pack, but is very important in unifying the pack. So this importance of finding what we can do to achieve unity, and sometimes walk away from some of the things that we have done in the past that kind of show our bias in a way where we don't even think of it as bias, we just accept it. Another example is Tamir Rice. Tamir was 12 years old. He was killed in a park in Cleveland as he played with his pellet gun. Well, Ohio is an open carry state. So, I mean, the fact that he had this gun, should he have been shot? Should he have been killed? Unfortunately, the police really, in this case, decided that he was a threat, only 12 years old, and he was shot. We see it sometimes too in everyday life. Some examples, a black father was talking to his son. He was interrupted by a white woman, and the white woman felt she could contradict the commands of the black father. She just, assumed, well, he's black and maybe he's not as intelligent and he's not as good a parent, so she interrupted, and she really kind of took over the situation. Another example, a black man who is followed into his apartment building, and he's in mostly a white neighborhood, and the person says, "Well, they're white, it's a white neighborhood. Why is a black person in the neighborhood?" So they're followed, and maybe there's going to be crime involved, and the person says, "Well, why are you following me? I live here," that type of thing. Isabel Wilkerson in her book mentions her experience of being in an airport. And she was followed by DEA agents. They thought maybe she was carrying drugs, and they went after her. So again, good to look at some of these issues and say, well, what are the biases? What can we do better? How can we improve? And what are some ways that we as a society can treat everyone in an equal and fair and just manner?